The 1980s were loud, bold, and unapologetically dramatic, and nowhere was that more true than on British roads. While the rest of the world chased pure speed, Britain chased something far more powerful: style. These weren't just cars. They were rolling statements. Sculptures built by people who believed beauty and performance truly belonged together. But here's the thing, most people today couldn't name half of these incredible machines. And that number one spot? It still turns heads like it just rolled off the showroom floor. If you love British automotive history, stick with us till the end. This one will surprise you. Number 10. Triumph TR7. Most people remember the TR7 for its controversial wedge shape. But here's where it gets interesting: that shape wasn't an accident. It was a calculated, deliberate gamble. In 1980, the TR7 was the face of a quietly dying British sports car tradition, yet it dressed itself boldly like the future. The sharp, angular body lines cut through convention like a knife through tradition. The pop-up headlights gave it a mysterious, blinking quality that felt almost alive on dark night roads. Inside, the cabin was tight, intimate, and driver-focused, exactly what a proper sports car should feel like. But what most people don't realize is that the TR7's iconic design was originally shaped around strict American safety regulations, yet it ended up looking far more exciting than anything Detroit was producing at the time. Few remember how culturally significant this wedge really was. Would you have taken one home in 1981? Number 9. TVR Tasmin. If the TR7 was bold, the TVR Tasmin was something else. At first glance, it looked like something stolen from a motorsport designer's sketchbook. The Tasmin arrived in 1980 with a wedge-shaped fiberglass body so sharp it seemed angry just sitting still. Built in Blackpool by a small, ambitious company that refused to follow anyone's rulebook, the Tasmin was pure, unfiltered British attitude on four wheels. The interior was surprisingly civilized, leather-trimmed, low-slung, and wrapped around you like a cockpit. But what most people don't realize is that underneath this elegant shape lived a Ford V8 engine that gave the Tasmin a completely different character from its aggressive exterior. This is where things take a turn. It was simultaneously violent and refined, and that contradiction made it utterly fascinating. Few cars from 1980s Britain looked this purposeful and felt this alive. Does it still look ahead of its time? Number 8. Ford Sierra XR4i. When Ford unveiled the Sierra in 1982, the British public was genuinely baffled. They called it the jelly mold. But here's where it gets interesting: the XR4i variant was something completely different. It wore a twin rear spoiler so outrageous it looked borrowed from a racing circuit. The Sierra XR4i was aerodynamics turned into pure aggression. That biplane spoiler wasn't just decoration, it was a bold statement that Ford had finally decided to stop playing it safe. Under the bonnet sat a 2.8-liter V6 that pushed 150 brake horsepower, genuinely serious numbers for 1983. But what most people don't realize is how much this one car changed Britain's entire perception of the family saloon forever. Suddenly, practical cars could be genuinely exciting. The XR4i made perfectly respectable people want to drive sideways. And that, in 1980s Britain, was practically revolutionary. Is this the most underrated hot car of its generation? Number 7. Rover SD1 Vitesse. Nobody saw this one coming. The Rover SD1 looked like something an Italian designer dreamed up, because one essentially did. Inspired by the Ferrari Daytona's fastback silhouette, the SD1 wore its hatchback body with surprising elegance for a British family saloon. But here's where it gets interesting: the Vitesse version, launched in 1982, added genuine performance to that already dramatic shape. A fuel-injected 3.5-liter V8 sat under that long, sweeping bonnet, giving the Vitesse enough muscle to embarrass far more expensive machinery. The interior was a proper British affair: walnut trim, deep seats, and an air of restrained authority. But what most people don't realize is that the SD1 Vitesse was winning touring car championships during this era, racing on Saturdays and sitting in dealership showrooms on Mondays. Few cars have led such a double life. This is something enthusiasts still debate: was the SD1 Vitesse Britain's greatest sleeper car? Number 6. Aston Martin Lagonda. And then there was this. The Aston Martin Lagonda didn't just arrive, it detonated. Refined through the early 1980s from its original 1976 launch, it was genuinely unlike anything else on four wheels anywhere in the world. But here's where it gets interesting: the Lagonda looked like a spaceship wearing a pinstripe suit. The almost impossibly flat, angular body sat barely higher than a curb, with a razor-sharp wedge profile that made the most modern designs of the era look timid by comparison. Inside? Digital instruments. Touch-sensitive controls. In 1980. But what most people don't realize is that those cutting-edge electronics were so advanced for their era they frequently stopped working, and yet customers kept buying, because the Lagonda was simply that visually intoxicating. And this is where things take a turn: the car was equal parts genius and disaster. Yet somehow, that very contradiction made it even more magnificent. Number 5. Lotus Esprit Turbo. If there was one car that convinced an entire generation that Britain could build a proper supercar, it was this one. The Lotus Esprit Turbo. When it appeared in the 1977 Bond film and returned in evolved form through the early 1980s, it stopped being just a sports car, it became a cultural statement. At first glance, the Giugiaro-designed wedge body looked almost too perfect, like it had been calculated at some very precise angle to the ground. And it essentially had been. But here's where it gets interesting: beneath that sleek glass fiber bodywork sat a turbocharged 2.2-litre four-cylinder engine that, in the right hands, could genuinely embarrass a Porsche 911. The interior was famously cramped and impractical. But what most people don't realize is that Lotus made this constraint feel intentional, like you were boarding something serious and uncompromising. Is it still the most beautiful British car ever created? Number 4. Bentley Mulsanne Turbo. This is where British style goes full aristocracy. The Bentley Mulsanne Turbo, introduced in 1982, was not just a car, it was a declaration. A statement that Britain could build luxury that moved with aggression. Most people still think of Bentley as stately and slow. But here's where it gets interesting: the Mulsanne Turbo changed all of that. By bolting a Garrett turbocharger onto the 6.75-litre V8, Bentley created something simultaneously refined and brutally fast. No luxury car in the world could match it. From the outside, it wore its power quietly: a subtle body kit, a darkened grille, minimal chrome flash. But inside, the Mulsanne Turbo was hand-stitched leather, thick carpet, and polished walnut. A gentleman's weapon. But what most people don't realize is that this car set the template every luxury performance manufacturer still follows today. Pure, understated, and utterly devastating. Would you choose this over a Ferrari? Number 3. Rolls-Royce Silver Spirit. If the Bentley Mulsanne said power, the Rolls-Royce Silver Spirit said permanence. Launched in 1980, the Silver Spirit was the most complete expression of everything Rolls-Royce stood for. At first glance, it looked almost conservative: the traditional upright grille, the long bonnet, the quiet proportions. But that's not the full story. Look closer and you see details that were genuinely thoughtful: flash door handles, precisely matched panel gaps, the way light moved across that hand-finished body. Inside, the Silver Spirit was a masterclass in sensory luxury: Connolly leather, Wilton carpets, and wood veneers matched from the same tree. The spirit of ecstasy on the bonnet wasn't merely a mascot, it was a promise. But what most people don't realize is that every Silver Spirit took months of skilled hands to complete. In a world of mass production, that commitment was almost incomprehensible. Does this still define what true luxury means? Number 2. Jaguar XJS. Few cars in automotive history have possessed the kind of complex, polarizing beauty the Jaguar XJS did. When it arrived in 1975, many said it was too radical. By the 1980s, it had settled into something else: a dark, cinematic glamour that nothing could match. The flying buttress C-pillars were either its greatest design feature or its biggest visual mistake, depending entirely on who you asked. But here's where it gets interesting: by the mid-1980s, the XJS had matured beautifully into something close to perfection. The interior remained a masterwork of leather and wood. The V12 engine delivered a sound that made grown men emotional. But what most people don't realize is that the XJS offered Aston Martin levels of presence at a fraction of the price. This is something enthusiasts still debate. Few cars have ever aged into beauty quite the way the XJS did. And few ever will. Number 1. Aston Martin V8 Vantage. And here we are, the one car that started this entire conversation. The Aston Martin V8 Vantage. In 1977 it became the world's fastest production car. But in the 1980s, it became something more important than fast, it became truly legendary. At first glance, the V8 Vantage looked carved from controlled fury. The wide arches, the muscular bonnet bulge, the aggressive front air dam, every single detail said one thing: serious business. Inside, hand-stitched leather-wrapped an interior that felt like a gentleman's club traveling at 170 miles per hour. But what most people don't realize is that the V8 Vantage was hand-built by fewer than 200 craftsmen at Newport Pagnell, each car taking months to complete, each one slightly different from the last. Because this wasn't just a car. It was a work of art that happened to have wheels. And that's exactly why it still turns heads today. The 1980s weren't just a decade for British cars, they were a defining chapter in automotive style. From sharp-edged wedge rebels to silky grand tourers. These machines captured something the rest of the world was still searching for, the belief that beauty and performance could genuinely coexist. That legacy never truly fades, it drives. If you enjoyed this journey through Britain's boldest decade, hit subscribe and join the Britain Rewind family. We are just getting started. Which of these 10 cars do you think deserves more recognition today? Drop your answer in the comments, we always read every single one.